A storm breaks. Lightning flashes on skeletal armor that looks like it's fused to bone. The air goes cold, crackling with a killing frost, as a phantom horn echoes across the sky. This is the Wild Hunt, an image burned into the memory of anyone who's played The Witcher. They are the ultimate villains, led by the terrifying Eredin Breoc Glaz, a force of nature as much as they are an army. But here's the twist. This host of spectral riders wasn't born in a fantasy novel or a game studio. For over 1,000 years, people all across Europe genuinely believed in them, feared them. The ancient evil that inspired The Witcher's greatest foe is arguably even more chilling because for our ancestors, it was horrifyingly real. Long before they were the Ananel, interdimensional elves from a dying world, the Wild Hunt was a staple of European folklore. And this wasn't some bedtime story for kids. It was a deeply ingrained superstition that haunted the coldest, darkest nights of the year. The first written account we have from England comes from the Peterborough Chronicle way back in 1127. A chronicler wrote that many people saw and heard a huge group of huntsmen. He described them as black, huge, and hideous, riding black horses and black goats with jet black hounds whose eyes glowed like saucers. This was the core of the legend, a ghostly parade tearing through the winter sky, usually during violent storms when the howling wind could easily be mistaken for baying hounds. And if you saw them, that was a terrifying omen. Witnessing the Wild Hunt was said to predict a major disaster, like a war, a plague, or at the very least, your own death. In some stories, an unlucky traveler could be swept right up into the procession, their spirit forced to ride with the dead for all time. For many, this wasn't just a spooky tale. It was a terrifying glimpse into another world, an other world that was breaking into ours. Let's go deeper into the forests of the north where their leader waits. Every legend has a leader, and this one was ancient, powerful, and terrifying. So who was leading this nightmare parade? The leader changed depending on the region, but one figure stands out, a god whose power and complexity really get to the heart of the ancient evil of this myth. That leader was the Norse god Odin, or as the Germanic peoples knew him, Woden. Now we might think of the Marvel Comics version of Odin, but the historical Odin was a much scarier and more unpredictable god. Sure, he was the All-Father, a god of wisdom and poetry, but he was also the god of war, of battle frenzy, and crucially, of the dead. Odin is a psychopomp, a guide for souls. He's the one in charge of Valhalla, and his Valkyries are the ones who pick and choose who dies on the battlefield. It makes total sense that he be the one leading the hunt. In Scandinavia, the ghostly ride was often called Oskoria, the terrifying ride, or just Odin's Jakt, which means Odin's hunt. Odin was a wanderer, always traveling between the 9 realms on his 8-legged horse, Sleipnir, who could gallop right across the sky. To the ancient Germanic tribes, the veil between worlds was at its thinnest during the wild storms of midwinter, making it the perfect time for Odin and his army of spirits to come riding through. This is the true ancient evil the myth is built on. And I don't mean evil like a cartoon villain trying to take over the world. It's the evil of a hurricane, the chaos of nature, the terrifying and unstoppable power of death itself. Odin wasn't a devil. He was something more primal. He was a god of immense, unpredictable power who could hand out wisdom one day and bloodthirsty frenzy the next. His hunt wasn't about malice. It was a force of nature, as awe-inspiring and as inescapable as a blizzard. And if you were a mortal caught in its path, well, that power didn't particularly care. But Odin wasn't the only leader of the hunt. This legend was so powerful that it spread all across Europe, taking on new names and new faces wherever it went. This just shows how deep this fear really was for so many different cultures. In Wales, for instance, the spectral hounds were called the Cwn Annwn, the hounds of the other world, and were led by Gwyn ap Nudd, a king of the Welsh underworld. Elsewhere in Britain, the hunt was sometimes led by a legendary human king, like Arthur or the mythical king Herla. But maybe the most famous version, aside from Odin's, is the legend of Herne the Hunter, a ghost forever tied to Windsor Forest in England. His first official appearance in history is a strange one. It's not in some ancient text, but in Shakespeare's play, The Merry Wives of Windsor, from around 1597. In the play, Herne is the ghost of a forest keeper who haunts an old oak tree, wearing great ragged horns and shaking a chain in a most hideous and dreadful manner. For centuries, scholars have argued about whether Shakespeare was recording a real local legend or just made Herne up. We don't have proof of Herne before the play, but the imagery he uses feels too specific to be a total invention. Many think Herne is a local echo of older horned gods, like the Celtic Cernunnos, a lord of animals and the wild. It was actually the famous 19th century folklorist Jacob Grimm who made the term wild hunt popular and was the first to connect figures like Herne to the bigger European tradition. Grimm believed that characters like Herne were the English version of Woden, a folk memory of an old pagan god who was now remembered as a ghost in the woods. Some theories even suggest the name Herne might come from Herion, one of the titles used for Woden in his role as a leader of fallen warriors. Whether he's a ghost, a demonized god, or just a really good character, Herne the Hunter taps into that same primal fear, the horned guardian of the wild leading his ghostly chase. So you have this powerful pagan myth, a story about gods and spirits riding the winter storm. It's basically a natural event, given a divine mythic shape. But as a new religion, Christianity, spread across Europe, the image of the hunt started to change. It got darker, more twisted, and way more evil. The church couldn't just get rid of these deeply held beliefs, so it did the next best thing. It reframed them. In this new Christian context, the respected pagan gods were demoted to demons. Odin, the wise All-Father, was turned into a stand-in for the devil, leading a pack of damned souls as a warning against returning to the old ways. The antlers of a figure like Herne or Cernunnos, once symbols of nature's power, became the demonic horns of Satan. The hunt was no longer just a rite of the gods or the dead, It was now a straight-up demonic chase for human souls, a scouting party for hell itself. Jacob Grimm pointed this out himself, writing that with Christianity's arrival, the solemn march of gods was twisted into a pack of horrid specters, dashed with dark and devilish ingredients. The hunt, which once carried the possibility of blessings as well as terror, became purely an omen of damnation. The ancient evil of untamed nature was rebranded as the theological evil of sin and punishment, a scary story meant to cement the new faith and cut people off from their ancestral gods. And it's this long, complicated, and terrifying history that finally makes its way into the world of The Witcher. The creators, both author Andrzej Sapkowski and the developers at CD Projekt Red, pull from this incredibly rich history of European folklore to build their ultimate villains. The Wild Hunt in the game is a brilliant mix of all these myths. They are spectral riders who show up with a magical frost, bringing war and death with them, just like in the old legends. Their leader, Odin, is a terrifying king from another world, a clear echo of figures like Odin or Gwyn ap Nudd. Even their name in the game's elder speech, Dire Gruadi, or Red Riders, sounds like something straight out of folklore. The creators simply took this ancient fear and gave it a modern science fantasy spin. The ghostly riders are now elves from another dimension, and the sky they ride across is a portal between worlds. They are just the newest version of a fear that has been haunting the forests and skies of Europe for thousands of years. From the storm-tossed skies of ancient Scandinavia to the haunted forests of England, and finally to the screens of millions of gamers, The Wild Hunt is so much more than a video game boss. It's proof of how powerful a myth can be, a story that has changed and evolved over millennia, always finding a new face, but never losing its terrifying heart. It's a chilling reminder that some old stories are so strong they never really die. They just find new leaders and new worlds to haunt. If you enjoyed this dark journey into the myth behind the legend, subscribe to Salazar's Timeless Treasures. I explore ancient gods, haunted stories, and the dark roots behind fantasy worlds. What other legends should we uncover next? Drop it in the comments. Your idea might be the next video.